This obviously is the spotlight on cybersecurity for smaller firms. I think we have a great panel this afternoon, and I'd just like to introduce them. To my immediate left is Tim Villano. He's the Chief Information Officer at Artemis Global Security. He's a technology expert dating back to the early 1980s. He has managed IT security for several businesses, including conducting security risk assessment engagements based upon well-defined and accepted COBIT 5 standards. He also works on custom and NIST cybersecurity framework implementations at private and public critical infrastructure providers. His analysis of equity, commodity, and currency markets has been published in several industry periodicals. He has industry and personal experience and it serves as a bridge to IT and regulatory issues for critical infrastructure firms. To his left is Laura Dryden, who is a partner at Virgin Capital Management. For the past 15 years, she's focused exclusively on helping ultra-high net worth and high net worth individuals achieve their multi-generational investment goals through the use of customized portfolios designed for specific needs. Her market insights and investment expertise have been nurtured over 25 years, beginning at Credit Suisse First Boston, where she became a key member of the top-ranked investment research team. After leaving Wall Street, she joined another firm in the Connecticut family office, rising to the role of President and Chief Investment Officer. She's been with Virgin Capital since 2010. And to her left is David Edwards, who's warmed up the crowd already.
There's always a joker.
Yeah. He's president and founder of Heron Wealth, which provides financial advice, investment management, and real estate planning to individuals and families across the U.S. and Europe. He's an avid writer. He's contributed over 100 columns to TheStreet.com. He's a member of the New York Society of Security Analysts and the Investment Advisor Association. Prior to founding his firm, he was associated with Morgan Stanley, J.P. Morgan, and Nomura Securities, developing investment products and quantitative trading models. I'm Paul Miller. I'm a partner at Seward & Kissel here in the Washington, D.C. office. My practice specializes in registered investment advisor, registered fund matters, working with those firms and registering with the SEC and developing compliance programs. A quick point. If you have a question, there's two options for submitting them. You can use the app, if you've downloaded that, to submit the question, and it'll come up to the iPad here. Or you can use one of the cards that may be at your place or that will be distributed by the monitor. All right, let's get started. Cybersecurity has certainly been at the forefront of the issues that advisors are facing these days. The unprecedented cyber attacks at Target and Anthem and Equifax and others have shown the extent to which hackers and other bad actors will seek to gain access to business information and personal information of company clients. The SEC and its staff have responded and have issued a number of alerts and guidance statements, as we all know, highlighting what they expect advisory firms to implement by way of cybersecurity protections. Recently the SEC issued guidance on public company disclosures, again highlighting the importance of cybersecurity and addressing it promptly and disclosing it promptly. And of course the EU is about to implement its GDPR requirements in May. Some of the basic elements of the cybersecurity programs that are expected by SEC advisors include a risk assessment, including an analysis of your controls. You need to inventory your systems and controls around cybersecurity collection. You need to monitor and maintain systems that can track your data loss. You also need to have a process for dealing with vendor management, where you check with your vendors about what type of policies and procedures they have to protect your client information and your business information. You need to train your employees as to phishing and other scams that are quite common these days, as we alluded to earlier. And then finally, you have to have an incident response plan. We're going to touch on those points during this discussion. We're not going to go through the elements. Tim will walk us through some of the real-world experiences that he has and has encountered and some of the common types of breaches, how those are addressed. and how they're discovered. Laura will take us through her experience in crafting a program, doing a risk assessment, choosing an IT vendor to help with that process, particularly for smaller firms, and then the process for developing a plan and the procedures. And David will also share his experiences in and around those same topics. He'll also point out some common threats and challenges that his firm has faced. And importantly, he'll go through some of the practical implications of adopting the program and including the costs. And then finally, I think he'll point out some of the things that he's experienced as far as pushback from employees and from clients, which is often something you will experience if you haven't already. And then finally, we'll answer or respond to some questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. And I just want to say we sort of made a command decision. If you want to come off the slides and if you'd like to ask questions, please feel free, or we can simply guide you through that process. But in many ways, I feel lucky because I have been doing this prior to the SEC's initiative, so got to see their full progression. And there's not an enormous amount of guidance out there, but I think it's digestible, and I think it's moving in a direction that will benefit all of you. And we know that, and I take the SEC at their word when they've said, they're looking at this as a progression. There's liable to be another sweep. They're learning about these processes and basically continue to conduct an intake. So some of the, you can roll forward, Paul, of course, and Paul's told you plenty about us. So I've been asked as part of this panel to discuss some breach that we've seen in the field and we've encountered, and not many hands went up here, but I'll say that we tend to be one of the groups of people that people call when there's a dead body, and so we've had the benefit of seeing some breach and seeing how it's happened, and I'm sure you've we'll talk about some situations that you're familiar with, et cetera, but I'll try to move as quickly as I can through some of these slides. There's a lot of written material. We could talk about each individual scenario for an hour, so I'm just going to keep moving here, and if you have questions at the end, please feel free. But my first slide on how breach is discovered, most of the time that we're dealing with clients who suffered actual data loss, their data is showing up in the wild. Their data is being posted to a paste bin or a text site out there, and they're made aware of it from other people, basically. So that type of breach, could have occurred 6 months ago. It could have occurred 2 years ago. So data posted in the wild is one of the ways that we sort of regularly see people becoming aware. We have a couple situations in the past year where clients of RIAs have actually been emailed information from attackers or hackers saying, look what we've discovered and out there. And so we have RIA clients who've become aware of this, based on their clients coming to them and saying, we got notified about this. Probably, and this is just my experience, but probably the third most common is law enforcement actually knocks on your door and says, we've found this information. We've seen it on the dark web. We've seen it in paste bin. We've seen it different places out there. So, all of those are kind of unceremonious ways to discover that you've actually been robbed of your data, but it actually happens that way. And more and more we're seeing that firms have the maturity or the skill level to actually identify breach and malicious activity themselves, and they now understand reporting and escalation, whereas 2, 3, 5 years ago it was very different. So this is all changing quite rapidly. You can roll ahead, Paul. Thank you. So,
Sir, you have a question?
yes, sir.
In your experience, how long after the breach is the discovery made?
I will tell you that typically in most industry professionals are saying at about a year, and I believe that that's accurate. So the major issue that raises for all of you is, of course, forensics and log retention. And so I hate to say it, but that's something that I think should be on everybody's mind. And going back into 2015, the Department of Justice put out guidance on incident response and stepped on that issue of log retention, et cetera, et cetera. So the worst thing that can really happen is, say, data shows up in the wild, law enforcement comes to you, or there's a need to perform forensics, and you say, well, we've got 30 days of data. And so you've kind of fallen down in the ability to analyze, the ability to determine whether or not breach occurred and what the extent of it was. And that could be very important in discounting that breach or proving what wasn't accessed. So thank you. I appreciate the question. I hope that answers it. Okay. So I was going to talk about 3 scenarios that we've run into just fairly recently, and the first scenario up here, I said a personal or home system breach, and in an effort to move things forward here, I'll kind of limit what happens here, or limit the discussion of a bit, but we basically have a situation where an attorney working for a registered investment advisor was somehow breached, and they were engaged in a legal action on behalf of the advisor, and materials and documents that were stolen from the attorney were actually presented to the judge. So the hackers actually turned around and put information on the table for the judge. Not very pleasant for anybody involved. And like I said, we have the benefit of receiving these calls from people, and we got a call from the vendor saying, this is what we recommended in this situation. We took the system offline, we shut down the system, we did all these things, and did we do the right thing? And the answer was sort of yes and no. Good, you isolated the system. Bad that you shut down the system and wiped out the dynamic memory that could have been used for analysis. So it's not just us or advisors or the people at the advisor that sort of have to learn what to do here. Sometimes we actually have to educate our IT people and our vendors, especially for smaller firms. So just something to keep in mind. The second situation was an individual email breach, which is actually very common. People are breached via phishing and things like that. What was a little different about this was that an OWA platform, or an Outlook web access platform that was open and had no two-factor authentication, was actually breached or brute forced. And this is the way the hackers obtained information. So if you have Outlook web access, it'll reinforce the notion that it really needs to be nailed down. The other issue for me is that you have to take a look at your personnel and say, really, what is, who are the people of high risk in our firm? Who has the most interesting email archive here? We all may be using secure messaging and secure mail now, but 2, 3, 5 years ago, was that the case? People doing wires at our firms or receiving requests, whose email would I want to get into and look at for the last 5 or 7 years? So interesting circumstance there. The third example is sort of a persistent malware, where we actually identified malware on a system, and that system was calling out remotely overseas to about 500 addresses a day, and that's probably the most technically interesting situation to me. But again, these are 3 examples that we've dealt with, and I think during the course of the past year, and like I said, we're the dead body people. So you can roll forward. So some specifics related to that first scenario, or the breach of the personal or the home system. I think many of us can probably relate to having the secure connection, RDS, or a secure VPN at home, remote desktop services or remote desktop protocol. In the case of the attorney that was breached, there was no two-factor authentication in place there. The personal system was not covered by the firm or their IT vendor, so it was really left to the user to ensure security, to ensure antivirus, to ensure patching of the system. So these are all facts that we learned about the case afterwards and advised the firm on what we thought was best approach. More and more we see advisors considering the remote or the home environment. So something for you all to consider. Your high-risk people, the executive levels at your firm, what's happening on the home front for them, how are they accessing your secure networks, and we even see advisors thinking about family members, et cetera, and whether or not they'll be targeted. So as I mentioned in this case, I felt that system forensics were compromised, and the vendor made a pretty classic terrible mistake up front in how this was approached. So additional questions that we asked there. Did you activate your incident response plan? for the first question is actually, do you have an incident response plan? And by the way, that's probably the first question that a regulator is going to ask when they come through the door. You know, how about your incident response plan? Did you activate it, et cetera? When we found out some of the facts around this case, we were immediately talking about engaging counsel, protecting the process, et cetera. So, you know, these are things to think about. A deeper level of forensics was required there, both on a system level and at the internal network. So you can roll forward, Paul, and tell me if I'm pressing the time limit here a little bit. Okay, so with respect to that email portal breach, we're pen testers. You know, we're hackers ourselves. We know the tool set, and so if you engage us and you have OA or open portals or open dashboards, we're going to go after them. And it's a very common way that we breach firms. We know the number of characters, we know their complexity requirements, and in this case, the firm had very poor practices around securing that web portal. No lockouts, no timeouts at the exchange level. In other words, there's this open access out in cyberspace that anyone from anywhere in the world can bang away at, and we can attempt to brute force that and append special and prepend special characters and attempt to get at this portal. So we're currently testing environments where, you know, we can do that for weeks, and some hackers can do that for months. And we have specialized software that assists in that process. And by the way, the black hats have the same tool set that we do. So we're all buying the same tools and using the same tools. And like I said, there are also software that allows us to spray across everyone's email address and create subtle variations. So this is just something you have to be aware of as far as your open internet-facing portals are concerned. And I know people have heard about this, and we've been talking about it for years, but we actually came across breach that occurred at this level. The major problem is, again, the people that are identified on your website as your client services people, as your financial services people, as your CCO. You know, we assume that the CCO has the keys to the kingdom or access across almost everything at the firm. So your target, your target, your family, your personal access may actually be targeted. So in this case, we shut down the portal immediately. The firm is migrating to a different system with two-factor authentication built in. And so all this discussion about this open access that could have just been prevented had this firm taken the trouble of putting two-factor authentication in. Next slide. As far as our persistent malware example is concerned, we dropped into a small advisor's environment with agents to monitor and detect on their systems. And 12-person firm, right in line with what we're talking about here. And they were a lift-out firm from a broker-dealer. And along the way, they had sort of, there was a friend of an advisor who's working as an insurance agent who said, "Can I take an office in your new space?" And they brought him in, and they said, "Sure, you can take a share drive. Well, we'll build a directory on our share drive for you as well." And when we dropped into that environment, sure enough, it was that person who had that persistent malware calling out overseas all the time. And we looked at it, we tried to eliminate it. It was a variety of fileless malware that is attached to the boot sector of the machine. So you would run antivirus, and it would identify it, clean the system, reboot the system, and every time you reboot, the software is reinstalled. And then we'd start to see it calling back out again. And so I'll talk about some of those characteristics a little bit, but they made mistake in giving that person access, allowing him to sit on their network, et cetera. And we'll talk about some of the things that we remedied there, but we talked to that person and said, "How's your system working?" And he said, "Fantastic, I love my system, it's great, it's going terrific, best system I've ever had." And we kind of had to explain, well, your system's calling out to about 500 addresses a day, and you may have had data exfiltration that taken place for you. We took it out of service, we isolated that individual, we put him on his own separate network segment, so that kind of thing wasn't possible, and then segmented the firm's share drive. So please, you can roll forward, Paul. This is an example. I just wanted to show you what, what this type of attack actually looks like, and I wanted to give you an idea. But at the reboot process, you can see the PowerShell, point, which is the launch point, and then there's a common Windows application that pushes out those network connections. And the point of the malware that's really insidious is this particular malware was called a Vautrec banking Trojan. Actually dates back to 2012, 2013, and we think it might have been in place on this person's system for several years, actually. So for several years, that system may have been calling out like that. But the point of the 500 addresses is that 499 are okay, are acceptable addresses, and you can search them. There's one address in those 500 that's malicious and is catching and capturing data. So we're seeing more and more of this fileless malware like this. So I want to let the other participants proceed, but I just want to mention a couple more things. Think about your attack surface and your access points. And like I said, the personal system at home that's used to access your business network, or the remote portal that's internet facing. Those are all part of your attack surface, and people tend not to think about it because it's not in our immediate space or our office. Your CRM, your customer portals, the Tamaracks of the world, all of this stuff needs to be nailed down with two-factor and is all a significant consideration as part of your attack surface. The other thing we're seeing is that people's sub-advisors, people's managers, affiliates, clients, they're being breached. And so even if it's not you, you're going to hear about this more and more, and we're urging our clients to act from a doctrine of assumption of breach, or, what do we do if we're breached? You walk in the next day and say, if this person with this email archive is breached, where does that leave us and where do we go from there? So thinking in terms of incident response on a more granular level is something we're trying to accomplish with our clients.
So you're assuming that there will be, or there already is a breach in pretty much everything.
Yes, the doctrine of assumption of breach, and you can Google it and take a look at it, but we also deal with law firms, and we're dealing with international law firms. If you haven't read about the Paradise Papers or Panama Papers and the loss of tens of millions of documents and electronic data, you should really think about taking a Google and look at that stuff, because we've been called in by other firms in the space who are really assuming that they're under attack. And it's very interesting. When you make that assumption, all of a sudden, well, like I said, when there's the dead body, everybody freaks out and is hitting the phone, and we're coming in. But for firms that believe they're under attack, and if you're being phished, depending on the level of complexity and intelligence of those attempts, we might be able to say it about quite a few people in the room. So I wouldn't minimize those things. Sometimes they can be targeted. Sometimes you don't realize it. So don't mean to ring the fear bell too much, but now everybody else is going to fix that.
But there's good news.
There's good news. There's Laura.
Well, I don't know. All right. Okay. Hello. My name is Laura Drynan. I'm a partner at Bourgeon Capital. We're a small firm, so that's us. So we've got 5 full-time employees. We have 350 million of AUM. We have a compliance lawyer who assists us part-time for our compliance program, and we also outsource our IT. So why am I here? I don't think I have tremendous expertise in this area, except that in 2017, we decided that we were going to do a full cybersecurity review for our small firm. And what initially started out for me a very frustrating process ended up working out extraordinarily well, better than I could have imagined. I called up Laura Grossman, who's over there, and I said, hey, Laura, I'm so happy about how everything worked out, and I really thought that I'd be, put my name on a list for a reference for people, and also I wanted to be a reference for the firm that we hired, which, full disclosure, it's Tim Villano's firm, Artemis. And I just wanted to say, I'll be helpful. So tell people that they can do it too, even if they're a small firm. And Laura said, oh, well, why don't you come speak at the conference? And so I thought, oh, no good deed goes unpunished. Okay, so here I am. So are we secure? This is a question that, I mean, every day, I mean, you have small businesses. Every day you're going, are we secure? Are we secure? And all the news of the breaches, it gets worse and worse and worse. And, you know, at the beginning, we had, you know, secure email, complex passwords. We're trying to do as much as we thought we should be doing, but we didn't really have a full process, procedures in place. And we really felt that it was very important to do it, and we couldn't hide behind our size anymore. And in fact, we thought that that probably made us more vulnerable out there. So we're a small firm. We have limited resources, people, time, money. You know, is it really possible that we could have a strong cybersecurity program? And I think you can all do it. So, but we have to leverage our relationships, and that would be my advice to every one of you. Begin at the beginning, walk through the process, figure out where your holes are, and then see how you can make them go away. Next page. Oh, page before that. All right, so leverage your compliance professional. The IAA, the SEC, your own internal people, you know, we have an outside compliance lawyer who we use. There are all sorts of documentations and guidance from the SEC. But I will say for myself, as a portfolio manager and a financial advisor, I heard that, and this is what my brain looked like. I didn't know what to do with all the information. It was so scary and so theoretical to me, I don't really know how to apply it. So I was kind of like, oh, where am I going to find the time to do this? About the same time, next slide. About the same time, our custodian came out with their cybersecurity program. I don't know what custodians you use. We obviously use Schwab. And they came out with an incredibly intense and robust program. And I thought, oh my God, 5 steps. You know, I can do 5 steps. Oh, by the way, if you don't know your technology, what do they call them? A technology relationship manager at your custodian on a first name basis as a small firm, please do so. They are incredibly helpful, and especially in this environment, really very helpful to kind of walk me through things, but that's an aside. So yes, absolutely Schwab. I thought they were going to be the answer to my prayers. 5 simple steps, go forward. 5 simple steps, and this is just the beginning. I mean, it goes on from here. Very robust, very, very powerful program, but once again, small firm, oh my gosh, you know, what am I going to do with all this information? But we weren't daunted by this. We said, okay, we're committed. Let's start with step 1, which is the inventory. I don't remember who that inventory. The next page. Inventory. So Schwab provides us with a beautiful Excel spreadsheet, fill in the pages. I couldn't do it. I handed it to my IT professional. I said, here, fill it out. Took him a while, but he did dutifully fill it out. Fantastic. Number 2, it's the assessment. The assessment is 58 questions. This is where you are. This is where you want to go. And this is how you're going to get here. This is the holes. This is how you need to prioritize. So our IT consultant had been with us for a very long time, trust him tremendously, but he had difficulty filling out the answers to this question. And so, well, I don't know, maybe they're not the right person anymore. So we then did a full review of other local IT professionals, and we kind of came across the same thing. I mean, they can all put up a server, and they can all put email on your phone, but SEC regulations and cybersecurity, and most of them are kind of like, oh, but it's okay. We can learn with you. I don't need anybody to learn with me, right? Small firm, limited resources. What am I supposed to do? Yeah. Okay, so then I went back to Schwab again and the IAA, and I was speaking to other registered investment advisors. What am I supposed to do now? I mean, I really want to do this. I really think it's very important, but I'm really not sure how to proceed and progress. And so I started asking around, and believe it or not, there are firms who focus on cybersecurity for registered investment advisors who will help you at a small firm. So we had a list. We ended up, as I told you, we ended up choosing Artemis here. Part of our rationale was that they were local, but having now worked with them for, I don't know, 6, 8 months, being local certainly is not necessary in this state. Yeah. All right, so as a cybersecurity consultant, they came in. They began with the penetration test. Oh my God, you know, I was like a nervous Nelly. They were going through and trying to hack our systems. But they did the penetration test, there's remediation. Anytime that you're doing any of these things, as you're thinking about cost for your firms, expect remediation. You know, there's always something that you could do better. I think always, almost always, that you can do better. So that, I think you need to factor that in. And then there was this whole policies and procedures thing, which, you know, at the face of it, I'm like, oh yeah, policies and procedures. Wow, I mean, really, having the knowledge and the technology piece of it combined with the SEC regulations and creating policies and procedures that really say what you do, I mean, it was really kind of eye-opening to me, and it was really very helpful. In terms of what they can do for you too, and Tim, I may be speaking out of line, but I'll give you my experience. They really worked with us about figuring out something that was for our firm and our size of a firm and who we were and how we did our business. And it wasn't this big whole, you know, massive program. It was really, they worked with us to create something that was effective from a monetary standpoint and a time perspective. Important. In the process, they worked with our IT professional, and they worked very well together. I mean, it was really a good pairing, because they needed each other to help figure out where they were going. But along the way, for reasons specific to our firm, you know, we did also review the offering that Artemis had on the managed services side, which is called Havoc. And so not only, we decided to go with them, so not only did they do the theoretical, I call it theoretical, they're actually doing more than that, but theoretical and the policies and procedures, but actually hosting all of our stuff, and so that they were actually seamless and intertwined, and worked as a total system, and I call it the virtual CISO is what they end up coming. And actually, in terms of the cost of that, honestly, for us, and obviously everybody's different, for us, the cost versus our traditional IT vendor was not that much more. And with that, we got the cyber and the policies, which I think is so cool. All right. I'm going to kind of skip over this. I already talked a little bit about with the Artemis side, but this is the next slide. I mean, this is Havoc, and this is kind of what they also provided for us, other than just, you know, the managed services, you know, the computers and setting things up, but also the implementation of a cybersecurity program on an ongoing basis, employee training, great, being proactive and really calling us and saying, you know, we noticed that you weren't doing this and you should really do this, or we've discovered this new thing already, you know, we should add this on. But the amazing thing for me was the documentation. So on a quarterly basis, I get a packet from them that has all of the inventory, it has all of the patching, it has the dates that it was done and the computer that it was done on. And so all that, are you doing what you say you are doing? I have the documentation to back it up, which is fantastic.
So how
yeah.
about, how long did it take from zero to?
From the beginning of our discussions to the actual, the penetration testing was not very long. We had some discussions in between, but to come in and actually do was a couple of days. And then there's the remediation, so you do have to follow through. And then on top of that, then there was bringing them on as a managed services. So if you have to think about that, I mean, you're switching your entire technology services, which is a scary thing.
Right.
But from beginning to end, it was about 8 months,
Okay.
I think. And policies and procedures all buttoned up and all ready to go. And there's also a willingness to sit next to you during an SEC audit. Sorry. All right.
We've cut that out. It's no longer part of the program.
Oh, drat. Okay. So at the end of the day, next page. Well, before, yeah, okay. So at this stage, we may not be the fastest zebra out there, but we're definitely not the slowest. I feel really strong. I feel really confident about where we're at. I urge all of you to make a plan, be proactive, really look at those policies and procedures. Don't do off the shelf. I mean, Everybody's business is different. I'm not a technology person. It was really difficult for me to even think about what I needed to do. But with the help of Artemis and his team, it was really much easier at the end of the day. And I really do feel that it represents what we do in our business. And the last quote is from my business partner and I can without a doubt say to me it was the best money that we've ever spent. So
Cool.
maybe there.
Very nice.
Hey, Paul, I'm going to switch seats with you. I'm going to skip half my slides to be easier
Okay.
from there than from here. Because I want to get to questions more than slides. So I'm David Edwards, president of Heron Wealth. Actually began my career in systems, which was a good setup for this stuff. Who here uses Credit Karma besides me? Nobody?
Credit Karma.
Credit Karma. Do you know that you can go onto Credit Karma and see for free how often you have appeared in a data breach? So this is me, starting back to 2011. I've already been hacked 5 times. I'm not worried about it, right? I locked my credit history. I monitor my credit cards carefully, right? But I just want everybody to understand that it's already happened to everybody in this room. And it's just a question of resources from the bad guys. They have 9-to-5 jobs like the rest of us. There's only so far they can go. So the number one mission you have as a compliance professional or technology professional is to understand that there's no such thing as 100% cybersecurity. But there is 99%. And that's good enough if your firms are at 60. As Laura says, don't have to be the fastest zebra, just not the slowest zebra. So we're same as Laura, about 350, 120, 17 members, 9 computers, 6 laptops, remote servers, 7 iPhones, 4 iPads. I had no idea how exponentially fast our technology was growing until we did the same inventory as Laura. In 2013, we had what I call the horse email. Client wrote and said, "Hey David, I'm buying a horse. I need to send $25,000 to so-and-so. Can you set this up for me?" The guy lives on a farm in New Hampshire. He has a special needs daughter. Buying a horse wouldn't be out of the question. $25,000 is a fair price. But we weren't expecting that phone call. So I called him. I said, "Hey Bob, are you buying a horse?" And he goes, "Nope." I said, "You need to change your passwords." He goes, "I can't, I'm leaving for Europe in 2 hours." I said, "Oh my God, Bob, you need to change your passwords now." Somebody had been inside his email accounts for days, just as Tim described, sleuthing out his entire life, his relationship with us, and he wrote an email that was perfectly designed to get us to respond back. "Hey Bob, you buying a horse?" "Yeah, I am, but listen, I'm in Romania right now, I don't have a phone. Can you just do this for me?" Do you guys know the window trick? You take a wire transfer form and you lay it up against the window over an old signature and you trace it, and then you send it in to your custodian and they process it for you. You're on the hook for that. That's your money. That's not the custodian's money. So he changed his passwords. He went off to Europe. He came back and he wasn't getting emails from us. So I said, "Hey, Bob, do you mind if we log into your email account and take a little look?" He said, "Sure." We logged in and realized that the bad guys had created a filter so that any emails from us were being routed to a separate folder that he would never see, but they would respond back to it as if they were him. So that's when we realized that this was serious. We'd spent nothing on cybersecurity up to that point other than off-the-shelf consumer-grade technology. So I hired a consultant, Raj Goel, who's a BrainLink colleague of Tim's, and I said, oh, by the way, I loved working with Laura on this project because she had all of the checklists and roadmaps that we never had. It was so much easier for her firm. It'll be so much easier for your firms, right? So I called up Raj and I said, "Listen, I don't have unlimited time or budget. Tell me the 10 things I need to worry about the most, rank order them, and help me knock them off one after the other." And so we did. And the risks were the clients, of course, the team members, of course, password hygiene, right? A lot of this is obvious now, lost devices, vendors, complacency. This is the hardest thing of all. Our clients hate security protocols. They hate dual factor. They could never remember their passwords. And then also there's this bullshit compliance thing with the SEC that you have to be aware of as well. So this is the famous horse email. Looks perfectly legitimate, doesn't it? Right? about the only clue is that the person didn't capitalize the letter I. Isn't that weird? Everything else looked fine. This is a more recent email. It's getting ever more sophisticated. But in this case, I don't have any contacts in Indonesia, right? I haven't used Heron Capital as an email domain in about 7 years. That's an old address. So at our office, which is 8 people, we shout out whenever we see a really good-looking phishing attack, right? Right now, there's one coming around from American Express. The domain is aexpmail.com. Looks completely legitimate, but I'm not really expecting that email. So it's not a question of a once in a year. I'm gonna do it for time. 4 minutes. It's not a question of a once in a year compliance training session. It's continuous. This is the cybersecurity plan we came up with. We gave it 6 months. It took 12. Yours was 8. That's about the same. Number 1, establish 2-person review and release of all outbound cache and securities. The advisor has to agree and the ops manager has to agree. Otherwise, it doesn't go. And we've told our clients, don't wait until the last minute to ask for a wire for your house closing. It won't get there on time. Inventory all applications and devices. Yep, we've got a spreadsheet, same as you, right? It was remarkable to see how many computers there were. Categorized from critical to no risk. Password change schedule, right? Many of our passwords oblige us to change every 3 months. Almost every firm critical system now has dual factor, right? 5 years ago, that was kind of the exception. Now it's kind of the norm. We actually had to back down from this. Encrypt 100% of outbound email using TLS. Unfortunately, about 20% of our clients could not read the emails we were sending them, and 100% couldn't read attachments we were sending them. So we had to back that down. Add cybersecurity right to our E&O insurance. Yep, we did that. 2-factor authentication. This was critical. We were using Cisco routers and Norton Internet Security. And now we have Cyber Roam and some pretty heavy-duty stuff. Separating the Wi-Fi router, the free Wi-Fi in the office, so that anybody who's visiting is on their own system to address the issue that Tim talked about. There's another guy using our systems and his machine is contaminated. And then review the security protocols. As part of our annual review, which we just did in January, we have a phone conference, myself, our compliance team, our vendor that provides our remote server, and our cyber person, all on the same phone call, all chit-chatting about what we're doing, making sure that we've thought of everything possible. And because we're overachievers, actually 11 items now. This is the least of my worries. If you did the first 10 and never got to 11, don't worry about it. We had a routine SEC audit in June 2016. They didn't ask us a single question about our cybersecurity protocols. I was like dying for them to ask me, but they didn't. Train and educate team members. Educate clients. We tell them, listen, you cannot expect to get a wire transfer unless you've told us in advance, and we call you back on a known phone time. And by the way, our custodian now, Fidelity, they will make a phone call on 100% of all overseas wires and any wire over $25,000. All right? So let me just comment that one of the things people need to understand is, let's say there has been a breach, let's say a wire has gone out. If it's domestic, you actually have about a week to recover that money. It goes from Fidelity to a bank, and then a mule comes to that bank and creates another wire transfer and sends it on to Indonesia. So I've told my team, listen, I will not fire you for clicking on a malware phishing attack. I will fire you if you realize this happened and you don't tell me immediately. Because we have time to react. It's not just instantaneous. Don't attempt to read this on the overhead. I just want to show that this is what we got from our cyber team. It's 2 pages long. It's the list of all of the tools we have in place, layer after layer after layer after layer, to protect our firm. And if your cyber team is not giving you something equivalent, you need to ask for it. And this goes right into our compliance review. Let's see here. Oh yeah, the annual cost was 0 in 2012. Now it's about $4,000 a month, right? That sucks, but it's a fact of life. Ongoing challenges. The volume of monitoring. So Laura gets a report quarterly, you said?
Quarterly.
Okay, I asked them to not send me that report because I really didn't want to look at it. I said only let me know if something has gone wrong. Okay. Paul had a very good question in our preparation. He said, "Hey, David, what have you done when a breach has actually occurred?" And I actually had to think for a while because we haven't had a breach. I go, "Oh yeah, I remember now." My son Nicholas, he's a college kid. He's on a lot of sports sites and video sites, whatever, and his laptop was constantly being set up with malware. So I put him under our security regime, and then I got a call from BrainLick saying that a computer has been compromised, and I looked up at the inventory. I said, "Oh yeah, that's Nicholas. Give him a call and straighten him out," and they did. All right. By the way, I have industrial grade router and firewall in my apartment. Forget about my office place. That's something that Tim brought up. Determining whether a monitoring event warrants escalation. Well, that was easy, right? Phone call to Nicholas. This is a pain in the ass. It just slows everything down, okay? Today, I came down from New York on the Acela, and I took out my laptop, and I don't use the Acela Wi-Fi because it's not secure. I use my phone as a Wi-Fi, but it was a new phone, so there was some conversation between the phone and the laptop about whether it was good or not, and then Duo was not right, and then something else happened, and finally 10 minutes went by, I finally logged on, but when you're going 120 miles an hour down the corridor, you don't get good Wi-Fi, so I couldn't do any work anyway. That's a fact of life. Dealing with pushbacks from clients. I don't want to do this. It's too much trouble. What do you mean I have to change my passwords? Right? Pushback from employees. Why do they have to be 10-character passwords? Why? I tell them why. If we're hacked today, we're firm will close tomorrow, and you're unemployed the day after. And we are on schedule for questions. Do you want to switch back? Are you happy?
No, that's fine. Well, obviously, this is the list of the SEC alerts and so forth that many of you have probably seen multiple times. There are a couple of other pieces of material in the slides or with the slides, one of which is a template program that you can take a look at, and if you want to enhance your program by going through that, I recommend that. There's also a state data breach notification survey that our firm has put together, kind of outlines the basic requirements at the state level. If you are hacked, if you have a breach, what you need to do if you have any clients in those particular states. And I would say California has a pretty good outline of it, so that if there were one state to take a look at, that contains the information you need to include in the notice to your clients. So,
Let me just say that these are dense slides.
yes.
But if you take these back with you and print them off, it's a very good roadmap for exactly what you need to do. My stuff and Laura's stuff.
So,
To you and Laura, at what point does it become too expensive? Like, $4,000 a month is less than an apartment in Boston, so, but if it's $20,000 a month at some point, because it gets so complicated, at what point do we say either no connectivity or no business?
You want to start?
I find that a difficult question to answer, just because everybody's business is different. And, as I said, it ended up for us, the review of, Tim's sitting right here, right? So the review of our, I have to be a little careful what I say. The initial audit review, the penetration testing and all of that, to me, we do mock audits. We do them very frequently, and some of them were expansive, some of them were little ones, and it's, to me, it was in that range of expense for our firm. It seemed, to me, it's like a necessary cost of business going forward. And then the decision to move to them, using them as managed services, at the end of the day, we were paying for somebody to, as an outside service, to come work on our computers. And the reality is that the cost that they quoted us, the price that they quoted us, was not that much more. It was more, but it was not that much more. But I felt that what we got for the benefit of that, with the cybersecurity and then also the policies and procedures, was an incredible value, actually.
And I'll give you a sense of scale. We spend $4,000 a month on cybersecurity, $6,000 a month on office rent, and $7,000 a month on healthcare. So my observation is that the cost of technology and the cost of compliance is only going to rise. I started as a solo. I was a solo for 15 years. I believe it's impossible to be a solo today because those costs are there whether you're managing 100 million or a billion. And so I think that you need to aggressively push your assets towards a billion so that you have enough cash flow to cover all these needs.
With respect to the comment before about the IT, calling the networking firms versus the cybersecurity firms, I think a lot of them are eager to say, yes, we can help you with everything. The thing that impressed me the most about our IT vendor was they said, this is an entirely separate realm. We are not qualified for this. And we have made some contacts, some industry contacts. And now that we work with the cybersecurity firm, we actually talked with Tim's firm as well, which is very qualified. It's such a world of difference between the cybersecurity specialist and the IT networking firm. I don't think that you could parse it out based on expense. You're really asking for trouble. And on another note, I have a friend who actually owns one of these IT networking firms, and he said to me flat out, very few, if any, firms like us are qualified to do this. We'll try to sell it because we're in that business, but that's really playing with fire. So I think this is one of those things that you don't really have a choice, and it has become, it's certainly one of the major issues that we all face.
Yes, sir.
How does the cloud, using a cloud service rather than in-house network, I assume both of your firms have in-house network, not
Cloud, we're cloud.
How does this all relate to the cloud? This is probably an overgeneral question, but some of us have inside networks rather than cloud.
Sure, and what I can tell you is that security of cloud-based services has only improved over time, and so we're agnostic on internal versus cloud-based systems, but because we believe that cloud-based systems can be hardened and made secure. And just to give you an example, and we're not pushing Microsoft on people, but maintaining an internal Exchange server for email purposes can be a very difficult thing. Configuration and updating and upgrading is a very difficult thing. Office 365, which is a great offering for smaller firms. We see a lot of our clients moving in that direction. It has two-factor authentication built in. It takes the OA platform out of consideration because that two-factor utilization. You've got encryption at rest of your data that's stored there, and you've got new security features coming online all the time there. So, to us, there's a lot of money and resources going into those cloud-based services for both file sharing, for file storage, for email, and it's very difficult for a small firm to match the expense, the security that's being offered there. So, we see a lot of benefit to moving to cloud-based services, but it really depends on the firm. And it's a risk-based determination, like as the SEC says about a lot of things. True for cybersecurity as well. But I don't think there's any stopping the movement toward cloud-based resources. Then it'll be a question of how they're managed, essentially.
And let me just add, our firm is based in New York City. That's a terrible place to store data. You got your terrorism, you got your natural disasters, whatever. Our data lives in Ohio, and it's backed up in Idaho in a different time zone, a different electrical grid. And I asked what would happen if there was a malware attack. They said, no worries, we click a button, you switch over 1 second later to Idaho. And I said, have you tested that? They said, yep, annually. So that's part of your vendor due diligence, is saying, okay, well, you say that you can back me up in a minute, prove it.
And what I think what David's referring to is, if you go back to the Hurricane Sandy release back in 2013, the concept of geographic dispersion for your backups, your data, the cloud really has enabled that, made it very easy for firms to do it, and put encryption alongside of it. We're talking about a level of redundancy and replication here that there's cost associated with that too, but the cloud has really enabled that kind of redundancy.
David, we got a question about the level of insurance. What
Oh,
you're thinking
fabulous
about
question.
that. Yeah.
I just got a new policy. Our E&O insurance and cyber rider, and also I think we have a coverage of up to $1 million for outbound wires that go awry, is $991 a month. So that's through Willis, if anybody's looking for a reference.
I'm sorry, I just want to add on to that because we've seen something interesting in our client base recently, and that is there are some carriers, depending on your level of monitoring and detection or your tool set, that it will actually affect your premiums. So it's really the first time we've seen that. We've been twisting the arms of enterprise security vendors for 5 years, trying to get them to realize that you guys are defined as critical infrastructure providers as well, that small, medium-sized investment advisors run on a very efficient head count, and so they need to pay attention to you as well. But, for the first time, we're really seeing this payback on that process where insurance providers will say to you, now, if you have this tool set in place, it'll actually create a break for you, so something to consider.
Yes, question?
So proliferation of public Wi-Fi, things like GoGo in-flight, things like that, as a user of Office 365 or for anybody, specifically how secure is sending an email on the plane or sitting at Starbucks if I use, what are my concerns there?
Sitting at Starbucks can be quite different, just because, we see businesses that are in urban areas that are on the second, the third floor. Wi-Fi has an incredible reach these days, and we do test Wi-Fi and Bluetooth spectrum for clients, and you'd be surprised at how many unencrypted, networks there are floating around out there. My first response to that would be, think VPN, think VPN service. If you do have to make that connection, whether it's on an airplane or a cella, believe it or not, we can sometimes establish VPN connectivity from an airplane, depending on the service. Sometimes I'll elect not to work with connectivity if I can't establish VPN, but that's becoming easier to do. I don't think you should be working on company business or accessing email necessarily, or working on any files that you consider to be sensitive in a public Wi-Fi connection unless you can establish a VPN connection. Then you're probably good. And we do it with our phones. We do it with our laptops. We're very careful about it. We're very careful at conferences. I've been to hackers and black hat conferences where, half the people are running around trying to hack everybody that's on the public network. And so they're looking to make a fool of you. But, hey, there's a treasure trove here. I'd love to set up a rogue access point that's called, Hyatt with 1T guest, and see how many people attempt to connect to that. And but you can all do it securely. You just need to be thinking in terms of encrypted connection.
As a small firm, one of the things that I found, just a suggestion for people, like even sitting here at my laptop now, when I'm on a public connectivity, there's overlays that you could purchase really inexpensively to give you VPN. So you just log on to it while you're here. I have a 256-bit encryption overlay, and I never use an open network without turning that on. And they're cheap and they're fast, and they don't.
There are great retail services for VPN, and they're low cost, and there's no reason you can't go in that direction. You do just have to understand that at the server level, they can see your traffic. Okay, they're not looking at your traffic, especially known retail services. Now, we advise clients about those if they want to use them, that low-cost solution. And we have some other clients. I just had an executive management level person who went to Australia for 2 months and asked us to put up a VPN server in Sydney for him because he wants his own VPN and rather than the retail connection. But we practice the same thing that you do. I believe in privacy. I don't want anybody reading our traffic. We're protecting client information, so we're very cautious about it. And like David said, the home is locked down too. Firewalls. I have 2 teenage daughters. Number 2 is like a prolific hacker and has defeated me several times. I'm not kidding. I could tell you about that.
Oh, so proud.
Proud dad. Number one's engineering at Carnegie Mellon, and big trouble there. Don't bring it home. She's on the guest network with isolated policies. Don't touch me. Don't touch the network. And number 2 has done everything from bringing unauthorized devices to building her own wireless network within my network. No kidding. So, the kids, the teenagers, but anyway, the home practices are very important and getting more important. You have your bifurcated trusted network and guest network with guest policies and no visibility. It's going into the home too, for good reason.
It looks like we're at the end of the hour here. We'll be up here to answer any other questions, and want to thank David, Tim, and Laura for their wonderful insights.